Welcome to A Court of Transformation and Awakening. I'm Lorrie Gray.
And I'm Amanda Grace Harrison.
And today we are discussing Book 1, Chapter 8.
Chapter 8.
All right, so poor Feyre. She's still just in this constant state of, I need to get out.
Yeah, she's still in her survival escape mode.
She's still in escape mode, so she's walking through the gardens, but really she's just looking for hiding places.
I pretended to meander through the exquisite and silent gardens, but really, she's scheming.
She is. She's really just kind of looking for this way out, which again we can't blame her for, because she even talks here. It's deadly for humans. She gets it. She gets that she's better off here, but she still wants to go home. And so at this point, she's starting to look to Lucien as maybe this is the way to go. Maybe I don't talk directly to Tamlin. She seems to be not really in the mood to hang out with him. I mean, he does turn into a giant beast, so understandable. So starting to have this plan of, if I could, win Lucien over, like maybe he could be on my side. And so it was interesting. One of the ones that stood out to me was her kind of looking at herself and sort of taking this assessment of her own skills, where she said, I'd never been particularly good with words, had never learned the social warfare my sisters and mother had been so adept at, but I'd been decent enough when selling hides at the village market. And it was interesting. I'm like, I feel like this is a good call. I had a conversation with my friend about self-awareness recently, and she was like, isn't like the point of like self-awareness, if you don't have it, then you don't know it? She's like, isn't it kind of a catch-22? It's like, yes. But also I just done a teaching on like ownership and self-awareness in my membership program. And the way that I taught it to them was, I'm like, yes, there is a level of self-awareness that I think is sort of innate. And when you look at like the theory of multiple intelligences, it does seem like some people are naturally more self-aware. But one of the things I was asking them is like, how much do you really want to know the truth, though? Like, I think that genuine self-awareness takes a level of courage and bravery and asking hard questions that most of us aren't really willing to do. But also with that, sometimes I think it's self-protective to not ask the questions, because people ask the questions and they get the answers and then they use it as a weapon against themselves. And when I read this, I was like, I feel like she did kind of a good job here. She was able to be like, okay, I know that it's not like this, but I'm kind of good at this. And I was like, okay, so she definitely has low self-esteem in some areas, but I'm like, she kind of did a good job here of like being...
Yeah, she found one place. She's like, oh, there's this one place where I'm able to communicate well. So I'll use that energy trying to accomplish this goal.
Like, she didn't go with like, I'm off. Like, she didn't do this like blanket statement of like, I'm totally awful at it. She like looked at all the things. She's like, okay, so not so great at this, but great at this. Like, what are those strengths and weaknesses here? And took an honest assessment of her life. So it's like, good job, Feyre. That just stood out. It's like bravo. A lot of your thoughts here are not fantastic, but you did okay though.
Good job, Feyre.
You did okay there with some good self-awareness. Okay, and then before this episode, we were talking about, okay, then we got this like weird scene in the garden of...
She's being followed. She knows she's being followed. She's hearing these creatures following her. Or these beings, whatever the heck they are. She doesn't know.
What is this? Yeah, so I feel like we're hearing some stuff. So we're getting some hints that there's more going on here than what we're quite aware of. All right, but then that just sort of goes. We head back in. Steals a knife from dinner so she can have that.
What's funny is I always picture a butter knife too, and I'm just realizing in this moment that I'm like, it's not even, why do I always picture she's stealing her butter knife? Like, obviously that's not what she's taking. I don't know where my brain gets that from.
That's hilarious.
Because we don't really I don't use steak knives at the dinner table because I'm not a steak person, and my kids are having like burgers, so I only ever have butter knives at the table. So Feyre did not steal a butter knife, in case anybody else for some reason
thought it was a butter
Keeps
knife.
getting a picture of a butter knife that she's like, I'm going to take. Well, I guess it's because, like, even
love
if she'd
that.
taken a steak knife, like, Alice has already let her know, like, your weapons aren't going to work against,
matter.
like, you can't outrun us. You can't set up a trap to catch us. You can't, you're, you know, you just need to.
And she does, and she knows
trying.
it. Like, she knows it, and yet
She can't stop herself from taking that knife. She's like, anything will just, and a lot of it's even just for her own sense of like, okay, well, at least I know I tried to do, like her trap that she set up that tripped Alice. Like, she's like, fine, I know. It was just something I did to help myself feel like I'd done something. At least I'll hear you coming in and I'll have time to react. And when Alice is like, well, you can't outrun us. What's the
like,
point
that's
of
not going to
being,
matter anyway.
time won't
right?
even help you.
But I mean, I think it's that human drive to feel a sense of agency and control over our life. Like, and I think some people will settle for a false sense of it.
Butter knife. That's a very false sense of safety. Using a butter knife.
They'll go for the butter knife
beast.
version, butter knife versus beast, just because we need to feel it. All right, so we go back and we're at so many of these first chapters. We're just at the dinner table all the time. It's the only time we're hanging out. And we're having this conversation again where they're starting to ask some questions. And this one gets into hunting, where Tamlin's like, Feyre likes to hunt. And she's like, I don't
like to hunt.
don't like to hunt. She's like, I should have probably used a more polite tone, but I didn't.
Yeah.
But, in this place of like, he's like, you had a bow and arrow in your house.
Yes.
She's like, I wondered if he had almost said hovel again. But we see here that, Tamlin's thought about her. He's making some assessments. But so what he says at the end here is, unless your ridiculous legends claim that about us too. Now, again, this is one of those places where he's talking about the legends.
And the legends are ridiculous.
The legends
we now
being
know.
ridiculous.
She's like, I'm ridiculous.
She pulls it out and she does the same thing that she did with the word insignificant, and she pulls it out and then she repeats to herself, ridiculous, insignificant. And she's turning this into like this mantra.
Really empowering mantra.
A really empowering mantra. Like, this is how I'm going to think about myself. These are the words that I'm taking. And now, where the other one that we talked about we could say like, okay, well, we're not really sure what he meant.
Yeah.
This one was not.
He for sure was not calling her ridiculous.
He was not calling her ridiculous. Now, it's like, these human legends are ridiculous, and she is among the humans. So you can make a stretch there, and her brain makes a stretch there.
Yeah.
But again, it's that push for, we interpret the world through the lenses that we're wearing. Like, we always, the technical term is confirmation bias, where we're always going to find evidence for what we already believe. And the brain actually does. It filters out stuff that doesn't match up. Like, if there's any place where, like, in these conversations, and you can look back and you can see that, like, there are bits of, like, respect, there are bits of kindness, and you can watch how her brain just, like, gets rid of those, that it's not there. Which part of this, by the way, oh my gosh, telling stories about myself. Apparently this podcast is just, like, tell all, like, the worst stories. People are like, how are you a life coach? Because when you have the stuff go on, then you figure out how to overcome it, then you can teach about it. But it was like a joke in our marriage for the longest time, where my husband, he's like, if I say something positive, your brain, you still turn it into a negative. It's like, or if it's a neutral, it's like a negative is a negative, a neutral is a negative, and a positive still becomes a negative. He's like, what am I supposed to do here? And I will say, whenever I could actually see that there was truth in that, I felt kind of crazy. I know that's not like the right word, but that was the word I used for myself at the time. I'm like, I felt like a crazy person. And then I learned more about the nervous system, and I learned more about the fight or flight response. And what I learned is, like, when we are in a state of fight or flight, it's an involuntary thing where the brain is actively looking for danger, right? Like, we're in high alert, we're fight or flight. And so if it's not danger, it filters it out. And so the only thing the brain latches onto is the thing that seems like it could be danger. So, like, let's say you go into a room and there's 20 people there, right? And you're in an elevated fight or flight state. There can be 19 people who look happy and one person who's just kind of like chill. And the brain is going to disregard all of those people, and it's going to zero in on, like, that person's angry and mad at me. And it won't, and to the place where like it doesn't go, like the truth would be like the party was great, like everybody was happy to see me, but it's gonna like zero on, okay, but this person, and if the truth was they just weren't like super over the top happy, the brain's like, it was an awful party, somebody was mad at me, like this thing. And it genuinely filters out. It filters out positive things. Neutral things do become negative. Negative things become extra negative because all it's focused on is where's the danger.
Yeah.
The happy stuff, the positive stuff, the things that are going well, there's no danger there. Yeah. So the brain filters it out. And that was really helpful for me. I'm like, right, I wasn't doing it on purpose. This was my nervous system. But it did take a while, and it was helpful for me for a lot of times to, I would have to go back and actually really count evidence and really look at what was there because of the brain, the way that my brain would filter all of this. Yeah, so again, things that I see in her, I'm like, oh, Feyre, there are some nice things happening here, but your brain can't see it because since you've gotten here, you are understandably, you went from survival mode to hypervigilance because we're trying to escape. But it is impossible for her to see these things. Poor things. And so again, another, we talk a little bit more and then we have another thing. Actually, this is a bigger point. Before I talk about this, did you have anything else that stood out to you in this chapter?
No.
Okay. This, I think at the end of this chapter, when I was looking at the beginning, this is maybe one of the most significant things that stood out to me. Middle of page 79, she's going back to her dream, right? This dream that we're seeing of enough food, time to paint. And she goes here, there's this place of like, or to maybe learn what I wanted.
So it might not be painting.
Right. So she's aware that like she hasn't really spent much time with this. She's like, I could still cling to that scrap of a dream, though these high fae would likely laugh at how typically human it was to think so small and to want so little. And I'm like, how many of us is that true for? How many of us are dreaming so small and wanting so little? And honestly, I think for most people, because of the trauma we've experienced, because of the experiences we had in our childhood, I do think most people are dreaming too small.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Way.
I mean, not me.
Too small.
I'm definitely not guilty of that one. People are always like, they're exhausted when they ask me what I want to do, and I like read off this 18-page thing and like, well, gosh, I just want my family to be happy, and I just want some time to do a puzzle, and it's like, oh, yeah. Well, I can't not want all these things. Sorry, I can't unwant it. But no, I have most conversations that I have with people or in group coaching settings, whenever you always find like people, you're like, that's everything? That's all you want?
Yeah. Well, and again, that was one of those things where from a neuroscience sort of place, like the part of our brain that where there is that creativity, the part of the brain where we can access faith and hope, when your nervous system kicks you into fight or flight, you actually lose access to the part of the brain that does that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So people because you don't need to imagine possibility to run away.
It's that whole hierarchy of needs. Like if you're not safe, if you're physically not safe, then your body's not going to notice whether you're thirsty or not. As soon as you know you're safe, you're like, oh crap, I'm so thirsty. I haven't had anything to drink in hours. As soon as you had water, now you're like, oh, and then as soon as you have that met, it's that whole, and then you get up here and you can think about those higher needs. But
yeah, and I mean the fight or flight response, I mean, it's like understanding what happens in the body when people are in an actual fight or flight state has been so fascinating. But even things like a lot of people who have digestive issues, it's like, why? Because it's shut down. Like you don't need to be able to digest or absorb nutrients. All of the resources, like all of the resources are being mobilized in a way that helps us move forward. Okay, so things like, and when we talk about possibility too, those are long thought loops. When you're in survival mode, you don't have access to long thought loops. It's this idea of like 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, what's one thing that I have to do, because that's what survival looks like. You only can think about the next thing. There isn't that space of this could lead to this, could lead to this, could lead to this. And it's not even, It's not even just about like, have you practiced it? It's not even just, have you been honest? Have you paid attention? It's like, if you are genuinely in a legitimate state of fight or flight, like in terms of your nervous system and what's happening in your brain, you don't have access to that part of your brain. It's not even online.
Yeah.
So whenever I do when I do work with people, if somebody's nervous system is dysregulated, I'm like, hey friend, like there's not really a whole lot of point in doing this like gut healing diet if your gut's like not online. Like let's get out of fight or flight and into like rest and digest, and then do like the gut healing stuff. If it's like, hey, I'm trying to like dream, for my future, it's like, right, but where's your nervous system at? And if it's like fight or flight, I'm like, you may not have access to the part of your brain that you need to do that. And developing that core sense of safety, I think, is one of the most important things, because this is what I'm seeing across the board. This has become some of the sole focus of my work, and why I feel like we have to do, what I label as whole brain coaching. I'm like, for most people, the reason that they're not succeeding is because they don't feel safe enough to. Like, they don't have an internal core of safety to sustain them through the actions that it takes to get there, or to actually be in the place of success. And so developing that core of safety, I feel like, is everything. And so I'm like, doing the healing, breaking out of the cycles, of the patterns, of the fawn responses, of the people pleasing, of all those things, so that we can develop that core of safety and actually be able to open ourselves up to what is possible for our future. But it's not just a mindset. It's like nervous system based work. It's safety based work. And so whenever my questions for myself shifted from almost like, what's wrong with my mindset, to what would it take for me to feel safe enough to succeed in this way? Like, what would it take for me to feel safe enough to succeed in a bigger way? It was a completely different question, and it opened up a completely different set of answers for me. And I feel like it really shifted everything.
And how perfect that we have this character who is going through that. She doesn't have access to that. She still is she's still stealing knives at the dinner table.
Yeah. To think so small and to want so little. And at the same time, I'd also, to balance that out, and I don't think dreaming big isn't necessarily this big external thing. I think about, it was in one of Brene Brown's books. I think it was the Gifts of Imperfection, where she's like, she said something along the lines of like, there's nothing wrong with leading a quiet life, right? Like, it's not necessarily this thing that's like super big, but it's more about, do we feel enough safety to even imagine possibilities? And have we been taught to do that? And can we have access to that? But yeah, old favorite here. She is still thinking small.
Definitely thinking small.
But again, without giving much away, if she stayed here, if she stayed in thinking small, she wouldn't be a character that we would be following through a course built on cycle breaking. So what we can say is, while this is where she's at now, this is not where she stays, thank goodness, nor is it where the rest of us have to stay. The transformation may not happen as quickly as it takes to read one of these books, since we all know that can happen in a day or two.
Yes. These books are often consumed in 48 hours or less per book.
But it can happen. It can happen with time.
Yes. And that's chapter 8.
And that's chapter 8.
And that's chapter 8. Thanks so much for watching our Chapter 8 podcast. And if you haven't already, go over to ACOTAR, that's ACOTAA.circle.so, where you can not only watch these podcasts, but interact with them. And, well, I mean, you can't like choose your own adventure and make us choose different topics of conversation or anything, but you can leave your comments at the bottom, which will affect future episodes. If you have a suggestion about like, what if you guys talk about this? Or I thought this, or I thought you guys were way off, or thank you for that. All those kind of things, you can do that on Circle, or you can get to know other people on this journey, or you can jump in deeper, and there's all kinds of options for you there. So we'll see you over on Circle. Bye.
Bye.